December 23rd, 2015, Western Ukraine. Outside, the winter air is biting, a deep freeze settling over the Ivano-Frankivsk region just days before Christmas. Inside the regional power control center, it is warm, quiet, and routine. Engineers sip coffee, watching the monitors that represent the heartbeat of the grid. Then, it happens. On one of the primary consoles, the cursor moves. Not a jitter, not a glitch. It moves with purpose. The engineer on duty frowns, reaching out to grab his mouse, assuming he bumped it. He tries to drag the cursor back to the corner, but the cursor fights back. It pulls away, sliding smoothly across the screen as if guided by an invisible hand. Panic rises in his throat. He clicks frantically, but he has been locked out. He is now just a spectator in his own machine. He watches in horror as the phantom operator navigates to the breaker control panel. Click. A substation goes offline. Click. Another one. Click. 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 On the dashboard, the lights turn from green to red. Outside the window, entire neighborhoods are blinking out of existence. Darkness is not just falling, it is being executed. Who is holding the mouse? And why does this feel like the opening shot of a war that no one saw coming? To understand the darkness that fell over Ivano-Frankivsk, we must rewind the clock. This blackout was not a random act of vandalism. It was the culmination of a campaign that had been silently festering in the digital veins of Ukraine for months, perhaps years. Ukraine, in 2015, was a country on the edge. Following the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in the Donbass, the nation had become a testing ground for a new kind of warfare. Hybrid warfare, where tanks and artillery on the physical front lines were supported by invisible soldiers in the digital realm. Enter the aggressors. Western intelligence agencies would come to know them by a code name derived from a reference found deep within their code: Sandworm. They were not a loose collective of hacktivists seeking fame. They were disciplined, they were patient, and they were state-sponsored. Later identified as Unit 74455 of Russia's GRU military intelligence, Sandworm was an elite cyber espionage team designed for sabotage. Their mission was not just to steal information, but to disrupt the very fabric of society. But how does a military unit breach a secure industrial network? They didn't use a futuristic laser or a brute force algorithm. They used the oldest vulnerability in the history of security: human curiosity. Months before the lights went out, employees at several Ukrainian power distribution companies received emails. They looked legitimate. Perhaps a message from Parliament, or a notice about administration. Attached to these emails was a simple Microsoft Word document. It takes only one person, one tired employee, late on a Tuesday afternoon, clicking Enable Content on a document to read a macro. That single click was the Trojan horse. It unleashed a piece of malware known as Black Energy 3. But unlike a typical virus that smashes and grabs, Black Energy was a scout. It opened a back door, a tiny, invisible tunnel connecting the power plant's internal network to a command and control server in Moscow. Through this tunnel, the Sandworm operators entered. They didn't attack immediately. That would have been amateur. Instead, they lived inside the system. For 6 months, they were silent observers. They watched the engineers work. They learned the software. They memorized the schedules. They mapped out the architecture of the grid, understanding exactly which levers to pull to cause the most damage. They were like burglars who had broken into your house, but instead of stealing your TV, they sat in the corner of your bedroom every night, watching you sleep, learning your breathing patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to wake you up. By December 2015, they knew the system better than the people who built it. They had harvested credentials, escalated their privileges to the highest level, and planted a modified firmware that would disable the equipment permanently once the attack began. The trap was set. They just needed to wait for the coldest, darkest time of the year. Back in the control room,
what is happening?
The initial
the main
shock
console is
transforms
failing.
into frantic
We're
desperation.
losing power to Sector 7.
The
It's
engineer fighting
overloading.
the ghost
Everyone
cursor is not alone. Across the facility, and indeed across the entire region, Screens are flickering. It is a synchronized execution. At the exact same moment, 3 different power distribution centers, Prikarpatia Oblenergo, Chernivtsi Oblenergo, and Kyiv Oblenergoare, under siege. The attackers are not just disabling one substation, they are cascading the failure. They are systematically disconnecting 30 substations, one by one. The engineers attempt to regain control. They try to log back in. Access denied. They try to switch to manual override from their terminals. The commands are blocked. They are forced to watch as the power grid of Ukraine is dismantled in real time, right in front of their eyes. But the Sandworm team knows that shutting down the power is only half the battle. To cause true terror, you must also blind the victim. You must remove their ability to see what is happening and their ability to ask for help. As the breakers trip and the lights die in thousands of homes, the control center's phone lines begin to ring. At first, it seems like the natural reaction of confused customers, but the volume is impossible. Hundreds, then thousands of calls per minute flood the switchboard. The lines are jammed instantly. This is a telephony denial of service attack DDoS. The attackers are bombarding the call centers with fake automated calls, clogging the lines so that legitimate customers cannot report the outage, and more importantly, so the different utility branches cannot communicate with each other. The engineers are now deaf as well as powerless. They are isolated in the dark. And then comes the coup de grace, the final blow. The attackers have finished switching off the power, but they don't want the engineers to simply turn it back on. They want to leave a scar. As they prepare to exit the network, they execute a final command. KillDisk. On the monitors in the control rooms, the chaotic movement of the cursors suddenly stops. The screens go black. Then, a message appears. Or sometimes, nothing at all. The computers attempt to reboot, but they fail. The operating systems are gone. KillDisk is a wiper. It doesn't just delete files. It scrubs the master boot record. It turns the sophisticated computers that run the nation's infrastructure into useless bricks of plastic and silicon.
It is the digital equivalent
of burning down the library after you've stolen the book. But Sandworm isn't done yet. They have one more nasty surprise. They have compromised the uninterruptible power, supplies the battery backups that keep the data center alive during a blackout. Remotely, they sever the connection to the backups. The server room goes dark. The lights in the control center go out. Now, the silence is absolute. No humming of servers, no ringing phones, no buzzing monitors, just the cold winter air seeping into the building. Outside, the impact is immediate and terrifying. 230,000 people are plunged into freezing darkness. Traffic lights die, causing gridlock. Hospitals scramble to activate emergency generators. Pumps stop working, threatening the water supply. In the bitter cold of Ukraine December, heating systems reliant on electric pumps fail. The temperature inside apartments begins to drop rapidly. For the engineers, the digital war is lost. The computers are dead. The network is fried. There is no software patch that can fix this. They have to revert to a technology from the last century. In a scene that feels more like 1950 than 2015, the utility workers grab their heavy coats, flashlights, and physical keys. They pile into vans and drive out into the snowy night. They have to physically drive to the remote substations, break the locks if necessary, and manually crank the heavy levers back into the on position. It is a slow, grueling process. While they drive through the snow, the Sandworm hackers are likely watching the news feeds, seeing the chaos they have manufactured from the safety of their keyboards. This was a demonstration
for the first time in history.
For the first time in
had
history,
successfully
a
achieved
cyber
a kinetic
attack had
impact
successfully achieved a kinetic impact on a civilian population on this scale. It proved that you don't need missiles to freeze a city. You just need patience, code,
As the
and a
hours
back door.
drag on, the investigators
As the hours drag on, the investigators arrive. Security firms, government agents, eventually even teams from the U.S., FBI, and CIA. They walk into the control centers, stepping over the cables of dead computers. They are looking for fingerprints in a crime scene that has been digitally incinerated. What they find, or rather, what they struggle to reconstruct from the ashes of the hard drives, reveals a terrifying level of sophistication. The attackers didn't just break in. They owned the network. They had modified the firmware of the serial to Ethernet converters, the tiny bridges between the digital computers and the physical breakers. Even if the computers hadn't been wiped, the engineers still wouldn't have been able to send commands. The investigators realized this wasn't an experiment. It was a rehearsal. The target was Ukraine, but the message was for the rest of the world. We can do this to anyone. We can do this to you. In the days following the blackout, the lights in Ivano-Frankivsk eventually flickered back to life. But the investigation into who flipped the switch was only just beginning. Unlike a bank robbery or a murder,
there was no smoking gun left
at the scene, only smoking hard drives. For years, the perpetrators existed only as ghosts. In the geopolitical arena, the blame game was immediate. Ukraine pointed the finger east. The Kremlin denied everything, calling the accusations groundless and politically motivated. It was a game of shadows. Without a physical body to arrest, how do you put a phantom on trial? The courtroom for this crime was not a hall of justice, but the silent, windowless rooms of intelligence agencies in Kiev and Washington, D.C. For nearly 5 years, forensic analysts pieced together the fragments of code left behind like digital DNA. They traced the IP addresses. They analyzed the Cyrillic comments buried in the malware. They connected the dots between the blackout and previous attacks on NATO, on French television stations, and arguably on the 2016 US elections. Finally, on the 19th of October 2020, the gavel came down. But it didn't happen in Ukraine. It happened in Pennsylvania. The United States Department of Justice unsealed an indictment that read like a spy novel. They didn't just blame Russia. They named names. They charged 6 specific officers of the Russian Main Intelligence Directorate, the GRU. They were members of Unit 74,455, the Sandworm team. The indictment was historic. It described their actions not just as crimes, but as part of, quote, the most disruptive and destructive series of computer attacks ever attributed to a single group. The charges were staggering. Conspiracy to commit computer fraud and
wire
abuse.
fraud.
Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Damage to protected computers. The prosecutors laid out a timeline of destruction that spanned the globe. They argued that these 6 men used keyboards as weapons of mass destruction, targeting the civilian infrastructure of a sovereign nation during peacetime. But here lies the cold, hard reality of cyber warfare. There was no defendant in the dock. There was no defense attorney pleading insanity. The 6 accused men, Yuri Andrienko, Sergei Detestov, Pavel Frolov, Anatoly Kovalev, Artem
They would likely
Ochechenko,
never see
and
the
Petr
inside.
Pliskenware safe in Moscow. They would likely never see the inside of a Western prison cell.
The verdict,
therefore, was not a conviction. It was a revelation. The indictment confirmed what security experts had feared for decades. The rules of war had changed forever. The front line was no longer a trench or a border crossing. The front line was now the breaker box in your basement. It was the thermostat on your wall. It was the grid that keeps your children warm at night. The Sandworm team had proven that you could hold a nation hostage without firing a single shot. They showed that the infrastructure would rely on the intricate web of cables, servers, and since source is fragile, it is glass. And they have the hammer. While the diplomats argued and the sanctions were signed, the message from Unit 74455 remained clear. They were not rogue criminals hiding in a basement. They were soldiers of the state, following orders, executing a mission to freeze a population into submission. And although they were named and shamed, they were still out there, watching, coding, waiting for the next vulnerability. The verdict of this case isn't about justice served. It is a warning issued. The door to the era of infrastructure warfare has been kicked open, and it cannot be closed. The lights eventually returned to Ivano-Frankivsk. The heat came back on, the ice thawed, but the world had changed. The attack on Ukraine's power grid was not an isolated tragedy. It was a blueprint. It was a proof of concept for the future of warfare. In the years since that frozen night, cybersecurity experts have raced to fortify the walls. Governments now treat power plants, water treatment facilities, and hospitals as frontline trenches. But the attackers are evolving too. The code used by Sandworm didn't disappear. It mutated. It inspired new generations of malware, cheaper tools, and more aggressive actors. We live in an age of unprecedented connection. We demand smart homes, smart cities, and instant access. We have wired our very survival into a network that is inherently vulnerable. We have traded security for convenience. The scary truth isn't that the Sandworm hackers were geniuses. It's that they were patient enough to find the doors we left unlocked. They showed us that the boundary between the digital world and the physical world has dissolved. A line of code written in Moscow can freeze a grandmother in Ukraine, or stop a heart monitor in London, or derail a train in New York. Tonight, when you switch off your lamp to go to sleep, take a moment to appreciate the darkness, because you chose it, you control it. But somewhere, in a windowless room, a cursor might be blinking. A new team might be watching a new grid, mapping the veins of a new city. They are waiting for the right moment. They are waiting for us to look the other way. The grid is fragile, and the night is long. The question is no longer if the lights will go out again. The question is, who will be holding the mouse when they do?